Sound Cartel.
From Sound Cartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. It's certainly been a challenging time for small businesses, economically and politically. Workplace relations changes are just one example. Andrew McKellar, CEO of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, has been at the front lines. He reflects with Jeff Waters on some of the recent battles and where the sector is heading in 2025.
Well, I think we've been working on a lot of issues over the past year or so. In particular, obviously, workplace relations changes have been a big issue. I'd like to say that was a win. It would be hard to characterise it as a win. But look, honestly, there was I think a very united business front there with other groups, ACCI working with other groups, trying to take the worst edges off the legislation. And I think we were able to influence that. It's still a huge challenge for business. So that's been a big issue. We've been working a lot on the skills and training landscape. I think we have had some wins there, and actually we've worked very constructively with the federal government, who've put in place, new arrangements like Jobs and Skills Australia. So a very data-driven approach to understanding the labour market, understanding where critical skills shortages are, so that we can design future skilled migration arrangements around those pressure points in the labour market, not just in the short term, but with a longer term horizon as well. So I think there's a couple of areas where we've been working to try and achieve fundamental progress. Work health and safety, we spent a lot of time working on those issues with regulators. You often don't see it in the headlines, but there are emerging areas, things like biohazards, psychosocial hazards, these sorts of things. These are emerging areas of regulation where we put a lot of emphasis. We try to work with regulators to get it right. So look, I think those have been two or three particular areas of important challenge. Looking forward, market access, the international trading environment, the prospect of the change of administration in the United States and what that'll mean with things like global tariffs and global protectionism. For a nation like Australia, which is a country that relies very heavily on trade in goods and services, exports and imports, that's fundamentally important to us.
All right, so 2024 was a good year, but as you've outlined, we've got a returning president to the White House who's promising this amazing tariffs, of course, not with Australia, it must be said, who he has not threatened, which is great.
Well, we don't know. We don't know on that point. So what's been proposed, obviously, the new administration has signalled that they will impose quite heavy tariffs on China, up to 60%, for example, but for other countries, 10 to 20%. Now, that could include Australia. Of course, it remains to be seen what that impact will be.
But it must be said we're in deficit to the United States.
And that's true, and that is a big factor. So they have a trade surplus with us, so it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to start whacking us with tariffs. If we ended up reciprocating, it's going to hurt them more. We don't want to get into that kind of situation.
So that's one good thing, but obviously the ramifications are that there will, if he does what he's promising, President Trump, then there might be some sort of economic downturn because interest rates will go up because of inflation.
What it creates is the uncertainty around that international trading environment. So what will it do in terms of supply chains? What will it do in terms of the impact of those higher taxes, which is what tariffs are? It'll impact demand, so activity will fall.
True.
The impact on global inflation, I think, is uncertain, so it remains to be seen. But we could not envisage that it will be a positive impact. So it creates uncertainty, which obviously then business regulators, central banks and so on have got to grapple with what the outcome of that is. But certainly I think it's impossible at this point to say exactly how that will play out until the direction of the new administration becomes clearer. But from an Australian standpoint, we would always say we favour more open markets, better market access. We want access to important supply chains. We want to be able to export our commodities and the value add where we can provide that. We don't want a situation where that's been clamped down. That won't be good for the global economy.
All right, but of course, back home, the biggest priority is the election. So just briefly, what should we be looking out for and what should we be pressuring the government about economically for small business?
Sure. Well, there are major issues that are out there in the electorate. Cost of living is very clear, the impact in terms of housing availability and affordability. So those are issues that will resonate through the election campaign. Directly related to business, the cost of business is also an issue, and that reflects the broader inflationary pressures in the economy. Very much how do we keep the economy as strong as possible, as near to full employment as possible? We want to be in a position where small business is getting an even break. It's getting a fair deal. We're dealing with the compliance burden, but creating an environment where business is confident to invest, to keep people employed. That's the way we'll keep the economy strong. We haven't, I think, up until this point, really seen a strong narrative almost from either side around the agenda in terms of major economic reform, tax reform, very controversial issue. I don't think anyone's going to embrace that before the election. But at some point it needs to be done. It needs to be on the agenda if you're going to make the Australian economy more competitive, if you're going to drive the productive sectors of the economy. The missing word in the entire public policy debate for the past several years is productivity. Some way or other, whoever comes into government, whoever forms the next government has got to find a way, I think, to ensure that we have an agenda which is focused on driving that. Of course, the other issues that are there, including energy, the energy transition, those things are going to be fundamentally important. There's a lot of debate about how we achieve that, whether things like nuclear energy should be on the table or not. That's a major issue for the economy. Who knows how it will all play out? I think most commentators today would say there is a significant possibility that we could end up with a hung parliament and a minority government. We don't know how that would work. I think from a business point of view, the thing that we would fear would be a minority government where a party like the Greens had a significant influence in the House of Representatives or in the Senate. If they have a blocking position in either of those chambers, then we really would fear for what the consequence could be for business, because a lot of the policies, a lot of the things that they've articulated for are openly hostile to the interests of getting stronger investment, the impact in terms of major investment projects going forward, the sorts of things that they have proposed to put into environmental regulation, climate-related legislation, taxation, all of these things. I think that would be a major risk. So, we don't know how it will play out. There are some very important decisions that people have got to make, obviously, in how that influences the outcome of that next election. But I think one of the things we've seen in Australian politics over recent years, which is disappointing, is we see this sort of very polarised debate. It's very hard to get bipartisan agreement, many issues. And from a business point of view, we would like to see some of those issues being dealt with in a more bipartisan way in the national interest, rather than seeking one party or the other. And both of the major parties are guilty of this at various stages, trying to polarise debate, paint one side as being over to the far side of the debate and then being on the other side. Sure, we understand that that's about presenting a stark choice to voters, but from a business point of view, on many issues, we actually need bipartisan agreement in the national interest.
That was Andrew McKellar, CEO of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at Sound Cartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast.
Sound Cartel.